Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church, Sunday School Department, Ladies Class, and we are studying the book of Daniel. This morning we are starting in chapter 2, verse 17. To give you a little bit of background about what's been happening, Daniel is part of the nobility from Jerusalem, and he has been taken captive by King Nebuchadnezzar. He has been in Babylon for over 3 years, and we know it's over 3 years because soon after they arrived, he was one of the ones that was selected for training to be in the king's service, and that classes and schooling took 3 years. He has completed the schooling, he and his 3 friends, and Hebrew friends, and they have already gone before King Nebuchadnezzar and have been approved that they exceeded and excelled in their school. And we don't know how much time has gone before they had their interview with the king until the king started having a series of dreams that left him in high anxiety state. You have to remember who Nebuchadnezzar is now. He is the king of Babylon. This is the most powerful human being in the known world at that time. He has all the privilege that you could imagine, and he has everything that goes along with it. He has an army, he has lands, he has slaves, he has lackeys, he has money, he has power, and he is a young man. He's not much older than Daniel, and he is very arrogant, but he's very, very smart. God has blessed this man and appointed him to be in this place at this time. And Daniel was in his point of residence when there was a knock on the door, and the captain of the guard, who was known by Daniel and who knew Daniel, Eric, said he was come there and he had the unfortunate message to give that all of the men in Daniel's class, all of the soothsayers, the mentors, all the Chaldeans, because they couldn't interpret the king's dream, tell him first what the dream was and then interpret it, had been ordered to be killed. Daniel wanted to know, everything was all right when I was there earlier. What has happened? What happened? Why is the urgency? And Arioch is explaining it to him, and Daniel says, take me to the king. Take me to the king. Arioch was supposed to be taking him and the 3 others to massacre them. But instead, because of God's favor, he showed favor to Daniel. And he showed wisdom. Okay? And he took Daniel to the king. Another miracle. The king allowed Daniel into his residence to see him. Now look at the verbiage and you'll see another miracle. And he asked, and this is in verse 16, so Daniel went in and requested the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Everything that the men before Daniel had asked for, the primary thing they asked for was time. No, the king said absolutely not. In fact, off with your heads. But Daniel comes in and asks for time, and he grants it. What has changed? God's there. God's present. That's what's changed it. So Daniel was taken up in verse 17 of chapter 2. Then Daniel went to his house, and he informed his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about this matter. He said, come here, guys. Let me tell you what's happened. In verse 18, so that they might request compassion from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. Daniel impressed upon his friends just how important this was, just how important it was that their God intervened for them. Daniel is not unaware of the blessings that he's been given in order to even get to see the king that night. Back it up from there. To have the favor of Arioch, that he would take him in to see the king, and then the king would see him, and then the king would agree to give him time when he wouldn't agree to give it to any of the other wise men. He shared every bit of this with his three friends. And he said, we have got to request Yahweh to have compassion on our situation. How do you do that? When you have something that you're dreadfully afraid of and you need to have God's intervention or God's comfort, you pray, right? So Daniel said, I need time, King. I need time. Let me think about this. Let me go pray about this to my God. So in verse 19, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Daniel and his friends prayed mightily. These four men entreated their God, and the vision, the mystery, was given to Daniel. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. He didn't just, as soon as he got the answer that he sought, he didn't stand up and said, I've got it. Let's go to the king. No. The first thing he did, the instant that he realized God had placed the answer in his heart and in his mind, he started praising God. And I think the second thing he did was he told the other three young men with him what God had laid on his heart and told him what the answer was. In verse 20, Daniel said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and the hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Those four young men, they rejoiced and they praised God for his listening to them, for his enabling them to have the answer that the king is looking for, an answer that will save their own lives. In verse 24, therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon, and he went and spoke to him as follows. Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. In my thinking, this doesn't say it in the Bible. In my thinking, Arioch was pacing in a room outside where Daniel and his friends were praying. You see, he had order to kill these four. And although they had had an audience with the king, Daniel had, he was still responsible for the order that he had. So he couldn't take a chance on them disappearing. It would mean his head. So he was available when Daniel, with a huge smile on his face, I want to think, said, Daniel, Arioch, our God has shared what that dream was. I have the answer that Nebuchadnezzar needs. Don't kill. Don't kill anybody else. Don't kill anybody. Let me talk to the king. Take me to the king. In verse 25, then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. Can you see him? Come on, Daniel, hurry, hurry. Lives are at stake. Can you see them running to the palace? I don't know if it was 3 doors down or 3 miles away. But Eric took him there as fast as he could. And he was so excited and he had so much faith. I think he was there when Daniel did his dissertation in front of the king. And when his friends were there and did their dissertation. I think he is a first account witness of the wisdom of Daniel and the smarts of Daniel and how Daniel's God had blessed him and he had utmost faith in Daniel. And I don't think he was really, he may have been, but I don't think he was trying to take credit so much as to say, oh, wait a minute. I found one. You will remember him. I found one. He was an exile from Judah. He's one of the prisoners that we took, one we've trained. And he has the interpretation. The king doesn't even speak to Eric. But do you see his eyes whip from Eric's face to Daniel's? Do you see his whole countenance change when he looks at Daniel? Just last time he saw Daniel, Daniel said, give me time. And here's Daniel. Eric says he has the answer. So in verse 26, the king said to Daniel, whose Babylonian name is Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Are you ready, Daniel? Can you do it? Are you up to the job? Can you tell me the dream and the interpretation? Daniel, this is a 2-point question. You can't get just one side right. It has to be right all the way. In verse 27, Daniel answered before the king and he said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it for the king. Can you see the king's eyes? He said, I know that. I know that. Daniel that didn't come out the way that I would have wanted Daniel to lead in. But in 28, Daniel goes, however, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while you were on your bed. This vision wasn't for me, King Nebuchadnezzar. It was for you. God has a message for you, Nebuchadnezzar. You were lying on your bed, and it was on your mind what was going to take place in latter days. And God wants you to know. God wants you to see. Well, God wants you to know, Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 29. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than any other. But the purpose of making the interpretation known to you, king, is so that you may understand the thoughts of your own mind. You asked God a question, or he took it that way, and now he wants you to know the answer to that. This has nothing to do with me, O king. This has everything to do with you. That's what this arrogant king would really like to hear, don't you think? Everything's about him. In verse 31, Daniel is speaking. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. And that statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. As Daniel begins to speak, if the king had forgotten his dream, the dream begins to filter back within his mind, and he begins to be able to see it as Daniel speaks. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, and its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out from without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed, all at the same time, and all became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. Daniel describes his dream to him, and listen to it. He says, Dan, you are standing, in your dream, you're standing and you're watching a vision take hold. You're seeing a great, giant, magnificent statue. And he shows you all of the different elements of this statue. Gold was, he's going monetary value. Monetary value. The monetary value of the head of gold was the most. So then it went down in value till it got all the way down to the feet, which were potter's clay and iron, the least expensive. Okay? So he starts there, and he's calling it back to the memory of King Nebuchadnezzar. And he says, do you see it? That head and shoulders are gold. And it's silver. The breast and the arms are silver. And the belly and the thighs are bronze. The legs are of iron. Its feet partially of iron and partially of clay. He's seeing this in his mind's eye. He's remembering that. It says, and you, in verse 34, it says, you continued looking. In other words, in your dream you were fascinated. You were trying to describe it in your heart, what you were seeing, and what did it mean? What did it mean? You were in your dream trying to puzzle out what this meant. You were watching it and looking at it and trying to decipher what this meant, even in your dream. But as you continued to looking at it, until a stone, which was cut out without hands, a stone appeared. It wasn't one that you watched be cut with man's hands out of the side of the mountain. It just was there. And it struck the statue at its feet. The weakest part of this statue is its feet. And that's where the stone struck. And it crushed them. But the stone did more than crush the feet. As the statue began to implode, fall upon itself, it shattered, and it shattered, and it shattered, and it shattered, and it became like dust. It was so insignificant. Even the silver and the gold just became insignificant. It all was crushed. And it was so fine, it was like chaff, where you throw up the wheat and the wind blows and the chaff blows away. That's King Nebuchadnezzar. Couldn't figure out what that meant, and it was perplexing him to great length. And when you noticed that the statue was no more, your mind and your heart and your eyes were drawn to the stone. And the stone began to grow. And the stone began to grow. And soon it filled the whole earth. Well, that's the dream. Daniel looked at Nebuchadnezzar, and I can see Nebuchadnezzar nodding his head. Nodding his head. Yes, that's the dream. I'm no closer to understanding it, but that's the dream. That's the dream. In verse 36, this was the dream. Now, We will tell of its interpretation before the king. When he said the we, I think he was being extremely generous. I think that maybe his three friends were behind him, but behind them would have been the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, the magicians, all of those folks, because their whole lives were held in the balance here. And we will tell you its interpretation before the king. Daniel looked the king right in the eye, I think. And he said, "You, O king, you are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them. You are the head of gold." You are a ruler of the world right now. God has given this to you. He has given you the intellect, the battle plans, the victories. He has placed you where you are, and you are his token here. He's given it to you. You are ruler over all you see. You're the commander in chief. Daniel said, "But your kingdom is not going to be forever. After you," in verse 39 it says, "After you there will arise another kingdom. It'll be inferior to you. And then another, third kingdom. It's represented by bronze in the statue, which will rule over the whole earth." And then in verse 40 he says, "And there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break all those in pieces. In what you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it a toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery." Let's stop right there. Okay. So he says, your kingdom will not last forever, Nebuchadnezzar. You wanted to know what the future held. For all of the power and the glory that you have right now, that's not going to last forever. He's telling him in verse 39 about the Medo-Persian and Greece taking over the kingdom. That's silver and the bronze. And then he goes to the iron, and that's we think is Rome. Rome crushes and shatters. It was a brutal empire. None of these empires coming after Nebuchadnezzar are held together under one man's leadership. Not even Rome. Rome divided. You had Constantinople, Istanbul. He pulled part of the ruling class there, and the other part was in Rome, Italy. So they separate into two. And he tells him that the strength of the empire, not necessarily the length of time that they ruled, excuse me, but the strength and the unity of the empire kept getting weaker as the statue went down. As the statue went down. And he says the weakest of all is the end of the Roman Empire. Excuse me. My goodness, my throat's got a frog in the throat. And it's going to be the weakest point, the end of this age. And there's going to be something that's going to destroy it. Remember the rock do you see Nebuchadnezzar lean forward and listen to Daniel as Daniel is explaining this to him? And he's going to tell him now about the fifth kingdom. The fifth kingdom is the kingdom of the rock. It's the kingdom of Jesus Christ. Let's read verse 44. In the days that those kings and the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. He says, remember, this rock that was not hewn by human hands crushed the feet, and then the statue fell, and then itself they were crushed and became like dust that could be blown away like chaff. He said, the rock is the kingdom that didn't need the cultures from the prior empires to stand. It is the kingdom of the God of heaven, and it will last forever. You didn't have anything in your dream that showed the end to that rock kingdom, because it has no end. In verse 35, he says, inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God who has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and this interpretation is trustworthy. God wanted you ask, and God wanted you to know. So God has given you this vision, has given you this dream. And now he has provided an interpretation for what that dream meant. You're going to have a magnificent empire, King Nebuchadnezzar. You are the head of gold. You will go down in history as the most powerful single empire of its time. Your power will never be duplicated by any other kingdom or empire that takes the world. It will never be. They'll be bigger. They'll have more land mass. But the rulers will not have the absolute power that you have. But there will come a day when every man-made kingdom that you saw represented in the statue is destroyed. And there will be another kingdom set up, and it will be the kingdom of God. Well, in verse 46, King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, and he did homage to Daniel. And he gave orders to present to him an offering of fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel, and he said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel, and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made a request to the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court. King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid homage to Daniel. Doesn't say he paid homage to God. He recognized that Jehovah God, that Yahweh, was the superior God, because Daniel had been given not only the interpretation but the dream as well. And he recognizes that God is a God of God and a Lord of lords and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. And he promoted Daniel. And Daniel was very generous and wanted his 3 prayer partners to share in the generosity of the king. So they all got appointed to great positions of power. And it is amazing. It is amazing. Here they are, not long ago, They were frightened young men being dragged out of their homes, but they trusted their God, and their God did not disappoint. You and I have trouble every day. Well, I'll speak for myself. I have trouble every day. I have things that are tempting that I know I shouldn't do. I have things that are items I need to do that I don't want to do at this moment, so I want to put them off. I have to fight those battles every day. There's people I pray for every day. People whose my prayers are answered, and other ones where the Lord is shaking his head and he said, "That's not in my plan, Gwen." No, or later. The thing of it is, don't lose faith. Daniel didn't lose faith. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they didn't lose faith. They know where the answers lay. The answers laid in Jehovah God, and they weren't afraid to go before him. And they convinced this king of how strong Jehovah God was. We will start our next study in chapter 3. Thank you. May God bless.